He handed me divorce papers on the morning of my 42nd birthday. Not over dinner, not in a therapist's office, not even with the decency of looking me in the eye. He slid that manila envelope across the kitchen counter while I was still in my bathrobe, still holding a mug of coffee I'd made for both of us out of pure habit, still foolishly thinking that maybe, just maybe, he'd remembered what day it was. The envelope landed between the sugar bowl and the fruit basket I'd replenished the night before. He straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and said, "I think it's time we both moved on, Diana. You're 42. Be real with yourself." Good morning, listeners. It's Diana Calloway here, and welcome back to the channel. Before I go any further, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every single second of this story, please take 2 seconds to like this video, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment down below, because what I'm about to tell you is something I kept buried for almost 3 years, and I'm finally ready to let it all out. I had been married to Marcus Calloway for 17 years. We met when I was 24. And fresh out of a business degree I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for, he was 31. Charming in that loud, confident way that feels magnetic when you're young and still figuring out what love is supposed to look like. He had this ability to walk into a room and immediately become the center of it, and back then I thought that was strength. I thought that was power. I didn't yet understand the difference between a man who commands a room and a man who simply needs to own every person in it. I put my degree in a drawer. It happened slowly, the way most suffocation happens, quietly, incrementally, until one day you realize you haven't breathed freely in years. Marcus had a way of making my ambitions feel like inconveniences. You don't need to work, Di. Why stress yourself out? I make more than enough, and for a while, wrapped in the warmth of what I thought was being taken care of, I believed him. I built our home. I raised our 2 children, Ethan and Lily, with everything I had. I planned every holiday, hosted every dinner party, remembered every birthday of every person in his professional circle while quietly, systematically forgetting my own needs, my own dreams, my own name outside of Marcus's wife. By the time the children were in secondary school, something had shifted in our house. I felt it before I could name it, the long silences at dinner, the phone he always flipped face down, the business trips that stretched an extra day, then 2, the way he stopped touching my hand when we walked. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just the natural settling of a long marriage, the comfortable familiarity that people talk about. I told myself a lot of things in those years. I was very good at it. 17 years of practice will do that to you. His name was not the issue. Hers was, Chloe, 26 years old. A junior account manager at one of the firms he consulted for. I found out about her the way most wives find out, not through some dramatic confrontation, not through a private investigator, but through a receipt. A dinner receipt for 2 at a restaurant he'd told me he'd never been to when I'd suggested it for our anniversary. Too pretentious, he'd said. The bill showed 2 glasses of the champagne I wasn't allowed to order because we were watching expenses. The date was our 16th anniversary. I didn't confront him that night. I know that might surprise you, but I had learned over 17 years to measure my words carefully around Marcus. He had a way of turning every confrontation back on you until you were apologizing for things he'd done. So I waited, I gathered. And what I found over the following 6 weeks, emails, hotel receipts, a shared online photo album he'd forgotten to password protect, was enough to fill a courtroom. But here is what I was not prepared for. I was not prepared for his cruelty, because when I finally sat across from Marcus in our living room and laid everything out, calm, documented, undeniable, he didn't crumble. He didn't beg. He didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at me with a kind of cold assessment that I will never forget for as long as I live. "You were always going to end up here, Diana," he said. "I outgrew you. That's just the truth." He told me the house was mortgaged beyond what I knew. He'd refinanced twice without telling me, poured the equity into investments I had no knowledge of. He told me the savings account I thought had £40,000 in it had been gradually depleted and redirected into a separate account he'd opened 3 years prior. He told me his solicitor was very good and that I should consider agreeing to the settlement he was offering before things got expensive and messy for me. The settlement was £40,000, a lump sum, after 17 years of marriage, 2 children, and a home I had poured every ounce of myself into building. £40,000, the family car, a 6-year-old Volvo, and a generous co-parenting arrangement that, his solicitor assured me, reflected Marcus's commitment to the children. And then he said the thing that I have played back in my head every single day since, the thing that became the fuel for everything that followed. He said, "You're a housewife, Diana. You always have been. Without me, you'll be lucky to manage a checkout at Tesco. Be realistic, take the settlement and find something modest." I want you to really sit with that for a moment. 17 years, 2 children, every business dinner, every school run, every crisis managed quietly behind the scenes so that Marcus Calloway could stride into his professional life unencumbered. And he looked at me at 42 years old and told me to go find something modest. I signed the settlement not because I believed him, not because I had given up. I signed it because my solicitor told me a prolonged legal battle would cost more than the difference I'd recover. And because something cold and crystalline had settled into my chest where the grief used to be. A kind of clarity, a kind of absolute bone-deep certainty that I was going to make Marcus Calloway eat every single word. I took my £40,000, put the car in storage at my sister Rachel's, moved temporarily into her spare bedroom in Bristol, and I sat down one evening with a cup of tea and my old business degree that I'd kept in a box at the top of the wardrobe through 17 years of marriage. I opened it, I ran my fingers over my name on the parchment. Diana Catherine Marrow, that was the name on the degree, not Calloway, Marrow, my mother's name, my grandmother's name, mine. And I thought, right then, let's see what Diana Marrow can do. I want to be honest with you about those first months, because I think it's important. I think when people tell transformation stories, they sometimes skip over the ugly middle part, and the ugly middle part is the most important bit because it's where real decisions get made. Those first months in Rachel's spare room were hard, not romantically hard, not cinematic hard, just relentlessly, exhaustingly hard. I was grieving a marriage and identity and a future I'd believed in all simultaneously while trying to figure out what came next. Some nights I lay awake until 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, running calculations in my head, terrified. Some mornings I didn't want to get up. But here's what I knew about myself that Marcus had spent 17 years trying to make me forget. I am exceptionally good at reading markets. I always was. Even during the marriage, even while playing the role of the dutiful wife, I had quietly kept up with trends in beauty, in consumer behavior, in retail. I devoured industry reports in the evenings after Marcus fell asleep, not because I had any plan for them at the time, but because some part of me had never entirely switched off. Some stubborn, tenacious part of me had kept the pilot light on all those years, just waiting. I had always had a passion for beauty, not in a frivolous, superficial way, but in the way someone who has studied craft and quality understands what separates a genuinely exceptional product from a mediocre one dressed up in expensive packaging. I knew the industry, I knew the consumer, and I knew, this is crucial, I knew there was a gap in the mid-to-premium British beauty market that nobody was filling correctly. Not for women like me, not for women over 35 who refused to be sold either bargain bin basics or absurdly overpriced serums. There was a space in the middle that was being completely ignored, and I was going to step into it. I spent the first 3 months doing nothing but research, furious, obsessive, documented research. I talked to women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s everywhere I could find them, at Rachel's gym, at parent evenings, at the local farmers market, in online forums and comment sections. I asked them what they were buying, what they wished they could find, what they were settling for, what they felt the beauty industry was getting wrong about them. I filled 4 notebooks. I built a spreadsheet that eventually ran to 600 rows. And what I found confirmed everything I had suspected. There was an enormous, underserved, financially capable market of women who felt invisible to the beauty industry, and they were hungry for something that actually saw them. I used 22,000 of the £40,000 to register a limited company, Marrow & Co. take a short course to refresh my business knowledge, pay for the first round of product development consultations with an independent cosmetic chemist named Priya who I found through a referral, and move to London. The move to London was a calculated risk. I knew Bristol was safe. I knew London was expensive and brutal and unforgiving. I also knew that if I was going to build a premium beauty brand, I needed to be in the beating heart of the industry, not comfortable on its periphery. So I found a small, deeply unglamorous flat in Peckham, 1 bedroom, thin walls, a kitchen the size of a cupboard, and I made it mine. I bought 2 decent blazers from a charity shop on the high street, had my hair cut properly for the first time in years, and I started showing up. You need to understand what showing up meant at this stage. It meant industry events where I knew no one and had to force myself to walk through the door alone. It meant cold emails to distributors and buyers and PR contacts that went mostly unanswered. It meant networking meetings where people asked what brand I worked for, and I had to say my own and watch them recalibrate their interest levels in real time. It meant standing in front of my bathroom mirror every morning and saying, out loud, you know exactly what you're doing. Do not let them tell you otherwise. Priya and I developed our first 3 product formulations over 7 months of back and forth, testing, reformulation, and refinement. I was demanding not unreasonably but precisely. I knew what the products needed to do, and I knew what the customer deserved, and I was not willing to compromise on either. When Priya joked that I was the most particular client she'd ever worked with, I told her I'd take that as a compliment, and she laughed and said I absolutely should. The branding I did largely myself at the beginning, with the help of a young freelance designer named Jonah, who worked evenings and charged what he called founder rates because he believed in the concept. We went through 11 logo iterations, 11. Jonah once sent me an exasperated voice note at midnight saying, "Diana, we need to commit to something," and I replied, "We will commit when it's right," and 3 days later we both agreed that iteration 12 was exactly right. Clean, considered, quietly confident. The Marrow & Co. wordmark in deep navy and warm gold. Understated luxury for women who have earned it. I launched an online presence 7 months after arriving in London before I had a single product ready to ship. Just a beautifully shot website. I did a photography course for 3 weekends and shot the product mock-ups myself using Priya's samples and a rented ring light, and a weekly newsletter called The Marrow Edit where I wrote about beauty, quality, aging, self-possession, and the particular kind of confidence that has nothing to do with youth and everything to do with knowing exactly who you are. The newsletter grew steadily, not virally, not overnight. Steadily, the way real things grow through word of mouth, through referrals, through women forwarding it to their friends with notes that said, "This is exactly what I've been wanting someone to say." By the time I had 600 newsletter subscribers, I had also acquired something I hadn't expected, a reputation. It was the newsletter that brought me to the attention of Sylvester Graham. I need to take a moment here to tell you about Sylvester, because I want to be very precise about who he is and what role he played in this story. Sylvester Graham is, at 61, one of the most respected independent retail investors and brand strategists in the British luxury sector. He built his first brand at 32, sold it at 40 for a sum that the trade press described as life-changing, and then spent the next 2 decades doing the same for other founders with genuine potential. He does not take meetings easily. He does not invest sentiment. He is, by every account, a man who has seen every pitch deck, every founder sob story, every too clever by half marketing strategy, and is immune to all of it. He emailed me on a Tuesday morning in November to tell me he had been forwarded my newsletter by 3 separate people in a single week, that he found my thinking genuinely unusual, and that he would like to have coffee if I was available. I read that email 4 times. Then I closed my laptop. Then I opened it again and read it a 5th time. Then I wrote back within the hour, because showing enthusiasm for opportunities is not weakness, it is intelligence. I suggested a date, a time, and a coffee shop near his Mayfair office that I had researched in advance, because if I was going to have coffee with Sylvester Graham, I was going to do it on ground I'd already surveyed. We sat for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know exactly how long because when I finally looked up at the clock above the counter, I genuinely could not account for where the time had gone. Sylvester asked hard, precise, sometimes deliberately uncomfortable questions about my market analysis, my unit economics, my positioning strategy, my long-term brand vision, and I answered every single one of them with the specificity and confidence of someone who had spent the past 18 months preparing for exactly this conversation without knowing it was coming. He tested me on competitor analysis. He poked holes in my pricing model, and I showed him the revised model I'd already built that addressed exactly that concern. He asked me why I thought a 50-year-old woman in Surrey would choose Marrow over 3 established brands in the same space, and I told him in precise and unhesitating terms why the established brands in that space were talking to a demographic that didn't actually exist while I was talking to the one that did. At the end of 2 hours and 40 minutes, Sylvester Graham set down his cup and looked at me very directly and said, "You've done your homework." "I've been doing it for 18 months, I said. "And before that?" "Before that," I said, "someone convinced me my homework didn't matter. I'm not interested in making that mistake twice." He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "No, I don't imagine you are." He became my mentor, not my investor. That came later, and on terms I negotiated fiercely. But first my mentor, which was in many ways more valuable. What Sylvester gave me was access, not money, access. Introductions to buyers I couldn't have reached in 5 years on my own, an invitation to present at an industry roundtable where I spoke to 40 rooms worth of influence in 90 minutes. Honest, clinical feedback on every decision I was making, delivered without softening but always with the underlying respect of someone who takes your work seriously. And once, when I was genuinely doubting whether a manufacturing partnership I'd spent weeks negotiating was worth the risk, he leaned across the table and said, "Diana, trust your analysis. You built it. I've seen it. It's right." That was all he said. It was enough. Marrow & Co. launched its first product collection, 6 SKUs, all skincare, 8 months after my coffee with Sylvester. The launch campaign was targeted, precise, and cost me significantly less than industry standard because I had spent months building an organic community that was already primed. The newsletter, the social presence, the women I had talked to and listened to and written for who had been waiting for this. The first production run sold out in 11 days. I cried in my kitchen in Peckham at midnight looking at the dashboard. And then I pulled myself together and started planning the reorder. By the end of that year, Marrow & Co. had a waiting list for 3 of its 6 products, a feature in a major women's magazine that drove 1,000 new newsletter sign-ups in 48 hours, a stockist inquiry from a premium department store that I took 3 weeks to consider before agreeing to terms that protected my brand integrity, and a company valuation assessed independently at Sylvester's insistence that made me sit down very slowly and breathe very carefully for about 90 seconds. I had also moved out of Peckham and into a proper flat in Clapham with a second bedroom that I had converted into a home office where I worked long hours with a view of the Common and a French press coffee machine that I considered the single best purchase I'd made in 3 years. It was around this time that I began planning the Marrow & Co. grand opening gala. We had outgrown the online first model. We were ready for a physical presence, a showroom and boutique in an area of London that my research told me was exactly right. And the launch event was going to be the statement that announced Marrow & Co.'s arrival to the industry in terms nobody could ignore. I'd been planning it for 6 months. I had a venue, a guest list, a press list, a curated presentation, and this is important, so remember it. I had built a meticulous archive of everything relevant to the brand story. Every financial document, every audit, every communication with suppliers, distributors, and partners, every piece of documented evidence of the company's legitimacy, ethics, and financial health. I am, at my core, a woman who keeps records. 17 years of quietly managing a household, and a life will do that to you. The invitations had gone out to 200 guests, buyers, press, industry figures, loyal customers, and a handful of personal guests when I received a message through my website's contact form that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. It came on a Thursday evening. I was reviewing seating arrangements for the gala, which was 9 days away. The message was anonymous, but the writing style clipped, slightly aggressive, with a specific turn of phrase that I had heard spoken aloud at a kitchen counter on my 42nd birthday, was immediately and unmistakably familiar. You should know that people are looking into your business practices. Several former suppliers have questions. The press have been contacted. Think carefully about whether you want this kind of attention before your big event. It's not too late to scale back. I sat back in my chair, I set down my coffee mug, I read the message twice more, very carefully, and then I felt something that I want to describe precisely because I think it matters. I did not feel afraid. I did not feel panicked. What I felt was something like a door opening, and on the other side of it, a terrible, perfect clarity. I picked up my phone and called Sylvester. "Tell me about the anonymous message," he said, before I'd finished explaining, which told me he had also received some variation of contact. His assistant had fielded 2 calls that week from a journalist asking pointed questions about Mero & Co.'s formation and funding questions that were, as Sylvester put it, clearly fed from someone with a specific personal motive and a very basic understanding of how brand investment works. I told Sylvester what I thought was happening. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What do you need?" "Nothing yet," I said. "I just wanted you to know, Diana." His voice was careful. "How much do you have documented?" "Everything," I said. "From the beginning." Another pause. "Then you're fine," he said. "Don't change a single thing about the gala. Proceed exactly as planned." I need to tell you about Marcus and Chloe's situation at this point, because context matters. I had not been tracking Marcus deliberately. I want to be clear about that. I am not a woman who wastes energy monitoring her ex-husband's life. But information has a way of finding you when you exist in a world where people who know you also know him, and over the 2.5 years since the divorce, fragments had reached me without my seeking them out. His consulting firm had lost 2 major clients. There had been talk of restructuring. Chloe, for whom he had left after 17 years, had apparently expensive tastes that had significantly outpaced what Marcus's diminishing income could support. A mutual friend of Rachel's mentioned, in passing, that Marcus's house had gone on the market. Another mentioned debt. Another mentioned that Marcus had been telling people in whatever circles he still moved in that his ex-wife had lucked into a business and that anyone could have done it with the right connections. That last one I filed away. It told me exactly what I needed to know about how his mind was working. What I did not know, not until 2 days before the gala, was how far he and Chloe had actually gone. My PR contact, Sasha, who handled all press liaison for Mero & Co., called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Her voice was careful in a way I'd never heard from her before, which told me immediately that what she was about to say was significant. She had received 3 press inquiries in the past 48 hours, one from a blogger who covered brand transparency stories, one from a freelance journalist whose previous work ran heavily toward takedown pieces, and one from a financial news outlet. All 3 had received variations of the same information. They'd been told that Mero & Co.'s financial backing was undisclosed and possibly irregular. They'd been told that I had exaggerated my professional background. They'd been told by a source who identified himself as someone with direct personal knowledge of the founder, that the company's claimed sales figures were implausible given its actual market footprint. One of the journalists had been sent a doctored image. Sasha described it carefully, of what appeared to be a modified company filing with an incorrect figure in one of the revenue fields. Doctored image of a company filing. I sat down on my sofa in Clapham, Sasha still talking in my ear, and I felt 2 things simultaneously. The first was fury, cold, contained, absolute fury, because falsifying a company document, even a clumsily fabricated version of one, is not just petty. It is illegal. The second thing I felt was something I can only describe as grim satisfaction, because this was a mistake. This was a profound, arrogant, panicked mistake made by someone who had underestimated me for 20 years and apparently had not yet learned from that error. "Sasha," I said, cutting across her carefully measured crisis communications preamble, "I need you to do one thing. Tell every single one of those journalists that Merrow & Co. will be releasing a full, independently certified financial statement and corporate audit at the gala on Friday evening. Tell them they're welcome to attend and receive the full documentation in person. Send them press passes." There was a pause. "You want to invite the journalists who were contacted specifically to run negative pieces on you to the gala?" "Yes," I said. "I want them in the room." Another pause, shorter. "Okay," Sasha said. "God, you're something else." I called Sylvester next. He listened, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, "Do you already have the certified audit?" "I have an audit that I commission every 6 months as standard practice," I said. "It's current to last month." "And the fabricated document?" "I have the authentic original. Side by side, it will take about 30 seconds to establish what happened." Sylvester was quiet for 2 seconds. "Send me whatever you need me to hold," he said. "And Diana, let them come to the gala. Don't change a single thing." "I'm not changing anything," I said. "What I did in those final 2 days was prepare. I have always been good at preparing. Marcus used to mock it occasionally, would call me obsessive, overly cautious, unable to relax and let things unfold. What he never understood was that preparation is not the opposite of confidence, it is the foundation of it. I prepared meticulously, precisely, and with the specific and focused energy of a woman who has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment without knowing it was coming. I worked with Jonah, my designer, now full-time at Merrow & Co., to create a brief, powerful presentation. Clean slides, certified financial data, a timeline of the company's formation and growth fully documented and sourced, and one other element that I will come to in a moment. I called my solicitor to understand very clearly the legal parameters of what I was doing and what protections I had. I called Priya, who had worked with me from the beginning and was ready to speak personally to any journalist who had questions about the integrity of the product development process. I briefed my small, trusted team, 4 people at this point, on what to expect and what their roles would be if anything disrupted the event. I was calm throughout, purposefully, deliberately calm. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because I had decided that the only register in which I was going to move through the next 48 hours was absolute, unshakable composure. The night before the gala, I laid out what I was going to wear. A deep burgundy wool blazer, Merrow & Co.'s signature color, over a cream silk blouse and wide-leg trousers. My hair as it is now, silver at the temples, and I am not touching those temples because those temples are earned and they are mine. Simple gold earrings, no statement jewelry. The statement was going to come from somewhere else entirely. I also, on the advice of my solicitor, hired 2 additional security personnel for the event, kept their presence discreet, and ensured they had photographs and instructions in case certain individuals attempted to attend who were not on the guest list. I slept 6 hours. Not because I wasn't thinking about what was coming. I slept 6 hours because I had learned, finally, to take care of myself with the same thoroughness I applied to everything else. The gala was held at a beautiful event space in Fitzrovia, high ceilings, original Victorian ironwork, warm lighting that made the Merrow & Co. displays look like something from a dream. We had a champagne reception, a curated selection of canopies, and 6 immaculate display tables showcasing the Merrow & Co. full range. Jonah had done the event design, and it was extraordinary, the kind of restrained, considered elegance that makes people stop in the doorway and catch their breath before they've had a single glass. The room filled from 7 o'clock with 200 people who mattered: buyers, press, loyal customers, industry figures, a handful of women who had been newsletter subscribers since month 2, and who I made a point of greeting personally before the formal program began. Sasha had confirmed that all 3 journalists had accepted their press passes. They were in the room. I spotted one of them during the reception, the freelancer, a young woman with a recorder pen clipped visibly to her jacket, and I made a point of introducing myself to her, shaking her hand, looking her in the eye, and welcoming her to the gala. She seemed slightly wrong-footed by this, which was exactly right. Sylvester arrived at 7:30 as discussed. He greeted me with a brief nod, accepted a glass of champagne, and moved through the room with the ease of a man who has attended 1,000 events and knows exactly what this particular one means. He did not hover. He did not position himself near me in any obvious way. He was simply there, solidly present, which was all I needed. At 8 o'clock, I stepped up to the small podium at the front of the room. I do not have stage fright. I want to tell you that because I know some of you might be wondering whether I was nervous standing up in front of 200 people knowing what was coming. I was not nervous. I was ready. I welcomed the room warmly, briefly, with the kind of specificity that makes people feel genuinely seen. I mentioned the women who'd been with me from the newsletter days. I acknowledged the buyers and stockists who had taken a chance on a new brand. I thanked Priya and Jonah and my team. I spoke for 4 minutes about Merrow & Co.'s founding philosophy, using the language of the newsletter, unvarnished, honest, direct, and I watched the room listen with the quality of attention that tells you you've earned the right to speak. And then I said, before I move on to tonight's full presentation, I want to address something directly because I believe in doing business with absolute transparency. And I believe that transparency is not just a value statement, it's a practice. The room's attention shifted slightly, the way a room does when it senses that something real is about to happen. In the past week, I said, a coordinated effort has been made to contact members of the press with a series of false claims about Merrow & Co., about its financial integrity, its founding, and my own professional background. Some of this included a fabricated document designed to look like a legitimate company filing. I am aware of all of it, and I want to ensure that everyone in this room, including the press who received that information, has full access to the facts. I nodded to Jonah, who was at the AV console at the back of the room. The large screen behind me, which had been displaying the Merrow & Co. word mark, shifted. What came up first was the certified financial audit, 6 months current, signed and dated by an independent accountancy firm whose name is very well known in this industry. Revenue figures, expenditure, profit margins, company structure, all of it, precise and clean and completely inconsistent with the narrative that had been fed to the press. I let it sit on screen for a full 30 seconds while the room absorbed it. Then the slide changed. Side by side, the authentic company filing, clearly dated, clearly legitimate, and the fabricated version that had been circulated to journalists. The differences were highlighted. They were not subtle once you knew what to look for. Several people in the front rows leaned forward. I heard someone near the back make a quiet, sharp sound. I have provided a full copy of both documents along with legal correspondence initiated this week regarding the fabrication to every member of the press in this room, I said. The documentation is available at the press desk at the back. All 3 journalists who were contacted with false information are welcome to verify everything against the originals at your convenience, tonight or tomorrow. I paused. The room was very quiet. I want to be precise about where this originated, I said. I have no interest in public drama. But I also will not allow my company, the company I built from absolutely nothing, without backing, without privilege, without anyone handing me a single thing, to be slandered without consequence. And then I played the audio. This is the part I want to tell you carefully, because I want you to understand that I did not seek this. I want you to understand that I am not a person who records conversations maliciously or as a habit, but I am a person who, when she receives a threatening, anonymous message that she immediately recognizes as coming from a specific individual, makes certain precautions. And one of those precautions, during a phone call that had been initiated from a number I'd recognized, Marcus had called me 4 days before the gala, ostensibly about something to do with Ethan's university arrangements, was to record the conversation. The call had started with Ethan. And then, as I had suspected it might, it had shifted. You should think about postponing this event, Marcus's voice said through the speakers, clearly, unmistakably. There are questions about your funding that aren't going to look good for you. You'd be better off dealing with that quietly before you put yourself out there. What questions, Marcus? My own voice, calm. A brief pause. Questions about where the money came from. People are looking into it. People, I said.
What people?
Another pause, less comfortable. Just, there are questions. I'm trying to help you. You're not trying to help me, my recorded voice said. You've never tried to help me, and I think this conversation is over. The audio ended. The room was completely silent for about 4 seconds, which felt considerably longer, and then from near the right side of the room there was a movement, a disruption, voices quickly rising. And then I saw them, Marcus, red-faced, in a suit that had seen better days, and beside him Chloe, who looked simultaneously furious and deeply, evidently frightened, pushing their way through toward the front of the room. They had gotten past the front desk. I learned later that they'd used a printed copy of someone else's invitation, poorly forged, and made it perhaps 15 feet before my security personnel reached them. Marcus's voice was loud enough that half the room heard him.
"This is a setup."
He was looking at me, and his voice was shaking with a combination of rage and something else, something I recognized after a moment as humiliation. "You've twisted everything. You always do this. You manipulate." Mr. Calloway, one of the security team, calm and large and utterly unimpressed. "You need to come with me." "I will not. I have every right to. She's lying. This whole company is." Chloe said something sharp to him in a low voice. I could not hear it from the podium. I watched this unfold from where I was standing. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my expression. I stood at the podium and I watched my ex-husband of 17 years make an absolute spectacle of himself in front of 200 people who had come to celebrate something I had built. And I felt nothing urgent, nothing emotional, a kind of distant clarity, like watching weather happen on the other side of a very thick pane of glass. Security had them at the door within 90 seconds. One of the journalists, not the freelancer, one of the others, was photographing on her phone. I didn't stop her. That was her prerogative. The photographs, as it happened, appeared online by midnight and served as considerably more effective PR for Merrow & Co. than anything I could have arranged. I turned back to the room. "I apologize for that interruption," I said. My voice was steady. "Shall we continue?" The room, 200 people, buyers, press, industry figures, loyal customers, my team, Sylvester Graham standing quietly near the side wall with a glass of champagne and an expression that I can only describe as quietly, deeply satisfied. The room started to applaud. Not politely. Genuinely, the kind of applause that rises. I let it settle, and then I finished my presentation. The remainder of the gala was extraordinary. I will not pretend otherwise. The energy in that room after what had happened was electric, not prurient, not gossipy, but the particular energy of people who have just watched someone handle an impossible situation with more grace and precision than they thought was possible, and who are now looking at the brand in front of them with a revised and elevated understanding of who built it. 3 buyers who had been hesitant committed that evening. The department store representative who'd been sitting with a wait-and-see posture for 2 months came and found me during the networking portion and said, in a very matter-of-fact way, "I'd like to talk about an expanded agreement. Can we schedule something next week?" A journalist from a magazine I deeply respect came and introduced herself and said she'd like to pitch a profile piece to her editor. Priya caught my eye across the room at some point and raised her champagne glass, and I raised mine back. Sylvester found me near the end of the evening. The room was thinning out, champagne flutes being collected, Jonah running quietly efficient end-of-event logistics in the background. "How are you feeling?" Sylvester asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Finished," I said, in the good way. He looked at me with that direct, assessing quality he always has. "You didn't need me tonight. I needed you to believe it was worth building," I said. "That was the most important part." He considered this. "Fair enough," he said, and then, "Congratulations, Diana. This was always going to be something. I'm glad I got to watch it become it." He shook my hand, said goodnight, and left. I stayed until the very last guest was gone. I helped Jonah with the final box. I looked at the empty, beautiful room, the display tables, the Merrow & Co. signage, the space where 200 people had stood and been part of something I had built from £40,000, and a business degree from a box in the wardrobe. And I allowed myself, privately, one single quiet moment. Then I put on my coat and went home. Marcus called 3 times in the week following the gala. I know this because my phone showed me missed calls from his number, which I had not deleted because I have children with this man, and I'm not so petty as to pretend he doesn't exist where our children are concerned. None of the 3 calls were about the children. The voicemail he left on the 3rd attempt was 6 minutes long. I know this because I could see the timestamp. I did not listen to it. He emailed. The email's subject line was, "Please read this." I read the first 2 lines, which were enough to tell me that the email was about his financial situation and his need for some kind of arrangement, and his assertion that, given everything, I owed him the courtesy of a conversation. I closed the email without finishing it and did not respond. His solicitor sent a letter, an actual printed letter to my business address, which I can only assume he'd found through the company registration. It suggested that Marcus was open to a conversation about a potential informal arrangement, and that he hoped the events of the past months could be set aside in a spirit of goodwill. My solicitor replied on my behalf within 48 hours, noting that Ms. Merrow had no business or personal correspondence to conduct with Mr. Calloway outside of pre-existing co-parenting arrangements, and that all future contact should be directed through the appropriate channels. Chloe, I heard through the kind of peripheral social osmosis that you cannot entirely avoid, had left Marcus approximately 6 weeks after the gala. The details were, as she apparently put it to someone who passed this along to someone who eventually mentioned it to Rachel, complicated. I imagine they were. I did not spend any meaningful time thinking about this. What I spent my time doing was working, growing, building the thing that I had built from nothing into the thing it was becoming. Merrow & Co. expanded its retail presence 8 months after the gala, a flagship boutique in the location I had always intended, the one I'd been scouting since before the gala, with the right frontage and the right foot traffic and the right feel. We launched a second product range that had a wait list before the product was officially announced. We onboarded 3 additional stockists. The profile piece ran in the magazine. It was, the editor told Sasha, one of the most read features they'd published in 2 years. The newsletter is now at 64,000 subscribers. I write it myself every week without exception. It is the part of the work that I refuse to delegate because it is the most direct line between me and the women I built this for, and I will not put anything between us. I am 45 years old. I have silver at my temples and a company that is valued independently currently at a figure that would make the woman sitting in that solicitor's office signing a £40,000 settlement take a very slow, very careful breath. I live in a flat in London that I chose, that I pay for, that I furnished with things I selected, and every morning I make coffee in a kitchen that is entirely mine and look out at a city that I came to alone and frightened and refused to be defeated by. Marcus Calloway told me, on the morning of my 42nd birthday, that I would be lucky to manage a checkout at Tesco. I think about that sentence occasionally, not with anger, that passed a long time ago, but with something that I suppose is closest to gratitude. Because that sentence, delivered with all the casual contempt of a man who believed completely in his own assessment of my worth, was the most clarifying thing anyone has ever said to me. It stripped away every last residue of doubt and hesitation and self-diminishment that 17 years of quiet suppression had built up, and it left something underneath that was absolutely solid, absolutely certain, absolutely ready. He didn't free me, he just removed the last obstacle. I want to be clear about something because I think this matters, and I don't want the wrong lesson to be taken from this story. The satisfaction in what happened, the gala, the unmasking, all of it was never about Marcus seeing me succeed. It was never about his face when the audio played, or his humiliation in that room, or the calls I chose not to answer. I did not build Merrow & Co. to prove something to Marcus Calloway. He built it because it was worth building, and because I was the right person to build it, and because there were women out there, hundreds of thousands of them, who deserved exactly what I had to offer. The fact that he was present to see one small moment of what that building had become was, in the end, simply a footnote, an insignificant, clarifying footnote. The real story was never about him. It was always only ever about me. Ethan is in his 2nd year at university studying engineering, and he calls me every Sunday evening. Lily is in 6th form and has expressed very firmly an interest in fashion and brand design, and we have had several conversations about this that fill me with a kind of joy I cannot adequately put into words. She came to the boutique on its opening day and stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at me and said, "Mom, you actually did it." And I said, "I told you I would." And she said, "I know, I never doubted it." She was being generous, but I loved her for it. Rachel was at the gala. She was at the table nearest the left side of the room, the one I'd seated the VIP guests at because she is a VIP and has been from the beginning. She is the person who gave me a spare bedroom when I had nowhere to go, who listened to 6 months of product development monologues without once suggesting I was being unrealistic, who drove to London with boxes of my things when I found the Peckham flat and helped me carry them up 3 flights of stairs, and then sat on the floor with me and ate takeaway curry and said, "You're going to be absolutely fine, you know?" I knew because she said it. And Rachel has never in her life told me something she didn't mean. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to understand what fresh start actually means and what it doesn't. It doesn't mean waking up one day feeling strong and new and ready. It doesn't mean one transformative moment where you decide to change your life and everything falls into place. It means getting up on the mornings when you don't want to. It means sending the cold email that probably won't get a reply. It means saying my own brand in a room full of people who recalibrate their interest and deciding not to care. It means choosing every single day to invest in yourself with the same totality that you once invested in someone who didn't deserve it. It means trusting your analysis when the room hasn't caught up yet. It means keeping your records, because the day always comes when records matter. It means preparing relentlessly and without apology for the moment you know is coming, even when you don't yet know exactly what form it will take. And it means understanding, really deeply understanding, in your bones, that the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is not to prove anything to the people who underestimated you. The most powerful thing is to become so thoroughly, completely, unapologetically yourself that there is nothing left to prove. The reckoning, when it comes, takes care of itself. That is what happened in that room in Fitzrovia. I did not walk in to prove myself to Marcus Calloway. I walked in to celebrate something real. He chose to be in that room. He chose to make himself a footnote in my story. I simply provided the context for what that meant. Karma doesn't always arrive on horseback with trumpets. Sometimes it walks quietly into a beautifully lit event space in Fitzrovia and plays an audio recording through a very good speaker system, and then goes back to building something extraordinary while the people who counted it out deal with the consequences of their own choices. I want to close by saying this. If you are listening to this right now and you are in the early stages of your own version of what I went through, whether that's a marriage, a job, a friendship, a situation that has told you in some voice or another that you are not worth what you actually are, I need you to hear me. I need you to hear this from someone who has sat on the floor of a spare bedroom in Bristol at midnight, wondering how it all went so wrong. You do not need their permission. You do not need their apology. You do not need to wait for them to understand what they had before you begin building what comes next. You start building now, with whatever you have, from wherever you are. You keep your records. You trust your analysis. You find your Sylvester, the person who looks at your work and sees what it is, and you hold on to that. You prepare. And then you show up in the room in the blazer, and you let the truth be the loudest thing in it. Marrow & Co. currently taking wholesale inquiries for our autumn range, and the newsletter, The Marrow Edit, goes out every Tuesday. Links are in the description. Come find us. There are a lot of us out here. And finally, the question I genuinely want to hear your answers to, because I read every single comment, and I mean that. Have you ever found the strength to completely cut out toxic people from your life and watch karma do its job? Or did you feel the need to prove something to them first, to make sure they saw what they'd lost? I think both are valid, and I think the honest answer is often somewhere in between, and I want to hear where you landed. Drop it in the comments below. Tell me your story. I'm listening.